Chief Justice John Roberts doesn't care about people dying around the world. He stepped in again on behalf of Donald Trump and on his own initiative entered an administrative stay blocking a federal judge's order that Donald Trump's administration turned back on the spigots of $2 billion worth of foreign aid to stop people from dying, from disease, from hunger, from famine, from cancer that hasn't been treated, and all the other things that the State Department used U.S. aid as a measure and as an extension of their diplomacy around the world. But to Chief Justice Roberts, it's all about a briefing schedule. It's all about let's take a breath. We need more time. Let's do a stay of this particular order. We'll come around and revisit it at some other time. And we have some time for some voting and some briefing and some oral argument as people die around the world and American values and the American reputation to support democracy takes yet another hit. You're on Legal AF. This is my hit. Let's talk about the new order that just came out late last night in a case called Department of State Department versus AIDS Vaccine Advocacy Coalition. Which side of that equation would you like to be on? Chief Justice Roberts issued a 1-paragraph stay, an administrative stay, giving all the parties until tomorrow at noon to get their briefing in. In the meantime, Judge Ali, a new judge, Biden judge in the District of Columbia, his order, after a series of procedural hearings, briefing, motions for contempt, a full record that ordered the status quo be restored by a mandatory injunction requiring immediately that the funding of $2 billion be turned back on by the Secretary of State and others, that gets blocked. Let's talk about how we got here. On the 12th of February, a group of affected parties, contractors for the federal government that provide this particular aid, filed in the District of Columbia a complaint and motion for temporary restraining order, arguing that the turnoff, the cutting of the fuel supply for this aid package without warning overnight was the very definition of being arbitrary and capricious, and therefore violated the Administrative Procedures Act, violated the Constitution, the separation of powers, and what Congress versus the executive branch is empowered to do. They're the keeper of the purse, not Donald Trump. And his impounding or embargoing funds allocated by Congress, unconstitutional. The judge took a look at the papers, took a look at the argument being raised by the Trump administration, by the other side, agreed that it was more likely than not, the likelihood of success on the merits went to the plaintiffs. It was more likely that they were going to win on a preponderance of the evidence at the end of a trial, and they were being irreparably harmed. So the Judge Ali, enters on February 13th a temporary restraining order. On the 18th of February, the Trump administration, its Secretary of State, its Office of Management and Budget, provided the court with a compliance report about how they've turned on all the funding. They turned it off overnight. Why couldn't they turn it back on? Maybe because the Doge tech bros were busy inside the servers unchecking boxes to make sure payments didn't get made, even though the Secretary of State ordered them to be made. Maybe that's not helping. And so when the other side got the compliance report, they realized it was nothing of the kind. It was a non-compliance report. They filed a motion for contempt. Judge held a hearing, and the judge finally ordered on the 25th of February, after rounds of motions for reconsiderations and motions for stays were rejected, giving a hard red letter deadline of 11:59 p.m. last night to turn on the funding. In the meantime, the Trump team scrambled. They went to the D.C. Court of Appeals to try to get a stay. Didn't work. They filed an emergency application with the chief judge because he handles all things emergency over the D.C. Courts of Appeal. Roberts enters this administrative stay. Now, on its face, it looks like it's not on the substance. It's not on the merits. He's not making a ruling on the merits. He can't. But he can make, in terms of his shadow docket, without the input of the rest of the other 8 on the Supreme Court, he can issue a temporary stay for a few days. But he's going to keep that stay in place until he's satisfied or the full court makes their decision. Now, there's likely 5 votes, which is what you need to keep the stay in place, while the appellate court below, the D.C. Court of Appeals, gets full briefing. Everybody briefs, and they come back in 90 days to the United States Supreme Court. How many people are going to die in the next 90 days? How many lives are going to be negatively impacted irreparably impacted because of this 90-day delay. What was the matter with sending the money out? That was the status quo. Injunctions are supposed to hold the status quo. That's the period of time before the bad conduct happened. The period of time before the bad conduct happened was the funding of these groups. So in order to restore the status quo, you got to turn the funding back on. And if it's wrong, you'll get the money back from another deduct somewhere else. We're that concerned with dollars over lives and American reputation as the Chinese and the Russians hover over these downtrodden people, trying to turn them to the east. That's why we had U.S. aid through the State Department, because it was an extension of diplomacy. Yeah, every time we helped a dying person in Africa, it was one less terrorist. It was one less person who would turn against the West and the United States and turn away from China and Russia. We just gave an open path. And all these aid organizations, I don't mean AIDS, I mean aid organizations, most of them are US based. There are US jobs behind every dollar that goes overseas, and US workers and US consumers to keep the economy afloat. So now what's going to happen? Now, Justice Roberts is going to sit on his hands, let the briefing happen, keep the stay in place, and maybe 90 days from now, maybe they'll lift the stay if they determine that on the merits, Donald Trump's administration violated the Administrative Procedures Act and the Constitution. But with Roberts in that court, it's 50-50. It's less than 50-50. Let me just read you what Judge Ali, there's two judges in the DC, Ali Khan and Ali. Sometimes I get them a little bit confused. But in a most recent order, Judge Ali put it this way about the procedural issues in the case and where we are. On page 2 of 3, the court's TRO was clear, temporary restraining order. It found the plaintiffs had satisfied their demanding burden for temporary injunctive relief, including by showing that defendants' blanket suspension of congressionally appropriated foreign aid pending a review had and would continue to cause irreparable harm. In other words, this money was already allocated by Congress. You don't have the right to impound it or to suspend it and do a blanket suspension while you're looking for fraud. Go find the fraud and then cut those contracts off. That is legitimate. This turn off everything and rebuild from the bottom up, illegitimate, arbitrary, and capricious, and violates law. And that's what courts get to declare. So the judge went on to say that the blanket suspension was likely arbitrary and capricious as proven by the movements under the Administrative Procedures Act for failing to consider the immense reliance interest of businesses and organizations around the country. This country. They are dependent on it. They just lost their funding with no opportunity to replace it. You know, we have equitable doctrines that stop that from happening. You know, it's called estoppel, promissory estoppel. It's called equitable reliance, reasonable reliance, and the like. That's what the judge is referring to. And so when he then says in the bottom of page 3 in their status report, the Trump administration states they've begun the analysis of thousands of contracts, grants, and cooperative agreements of which the action was taken. The judge says that's a confession that you didn't do it before. And therefore it makes the blanket turn off of the gas even more arbitrary and capricious. And the Judge Ali reminds the administration that he's not substituting his judgment for theirs. They want to go line by line, contract by contract, and do their administration. He's not going to administer contracts. He's just saying the wholesale turning off the fuel supply, leaving these people in the lurch and killing people is not going to happen on his watch under the Constitution or the Administrative Procedures Act. And Roberts is saying, well, that's very interesting. Let's get to the bottom of all that. Let's have full briefing and a record. And, you know, and I got to go out and have ballet. I have ballet tickets tonight with my wife, but let me know how that works out in Africa, you know, with that woman that needed the Medivac for her cancer treatment. Let me know, you know, but I'll be in the middle of, some Italian opera. Thanks. That's where we are right now. We'll continue to follow it all. There's briefing tomorrow on by noon. I'll report back right here. Meet me back here on Legal AF, this YouTube channel. Hit the free subscribe button. Help us continue to grow our pro-democracy channel. Till my next reporting, I'm Michael Popok. I'm Michael Popok, and I got some big news for our audience. Most of you know me as the co-founder of Midas Touch's Legal AF and the Legal AF YouTube channel, or as a 35-year national trial lawyer. Now, building on what we started together on Legal AF, I've launched a new law firm, the Popok Firm. dedicated to obtaining justice through compassionate and zealous legal representation. At the Popok firm, we are focused on obtaining justice for those who have been injured or damaged by a life-altering event, by securing the highest dollar recoveries. I've been tirelessly fighting for justice for the last 35 years, so my own law firm organically building on my Legal AF work just feels right. And I've handpicked a team of top-tier trial fighters and settlement experts throughout all 50 states known as big auto injury attorneys who have the know-how to beat heartless insurance companies, corporations, government entities, and their attorneys. Big Auto's attorneys working with my firm are rock stars in their respective states and collectively responsible for billions of dollars in recoveries. So if you or a loved one have been on the wrong side of a catastrophic auto, motor vehicle, rideshare, or truck accident, suffered a personal injury, or been the victim of medical malpractice, employment harassment or discrimination, or suffered a violation of your civil and constitutional rights, then contact the Popok firm today at 1-877-POPOK-AF or by visiting my website at www.thepopokfirm.com and fill out a free case evaluation form. And if we determine that you have a case and you sign with us, we don't get paid unless you do. The Popok firm, fighting for your justice every step of the way.